And our regular Monday panel, Peter McGauran, former Howard Government Minister, now a Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, and Simon Banks, former Labor Advisor, now Managing Director at Hawker Britain. Gentlemen, good to see you both. Simon, this story, front page of the SMH, it's erupted into a bit of a row too between the author of this report suggesting massive leakage out of Medicare and the doctors' groups, the AMA, the College of GPs, believe they've been thrown under the bus, believe it's sensational reporting. Well, the report author, Margaret Foe, the PhD in this space that found the leakage, was standing by her numbers. In fact, suggests that 30% or $8 billion leakage every year out of Medicare is a conservative estimate.
Well, I think, Kieran, Australians want to make sure that their Medicare dollar is being spent properly. And look, if there are serious allegations, as these appear to be, that something's gone wrong, they should be investigated independently and thoroughly checked. And in fact, if anything, I think the medical profession should want that too, because the consumer, the taxpayer trust in Medicare, we all love and support Medicare as a fundamental part of our safety net and part of being an Australian. So I think we want to make sure that it's working properly. So look, I don't have a view about the ultimate allegation that's been made, but I would have thought an independent review would be appropriate, and let's get to the bottom of it.
Peter McGauran, what's your read on this story? Quite an explosive story today in terms of the magnitude of the claims here.
Yes, Kieran, it is disturbing at first glance, but I'm with the doctors. It doesn't ring true. Medicare's been around, as we know, since the mid-1980s. There's been various eruptions every 10 years or so of this kind. Normally it's pathologists or one branch of specialists or another. This is the first time the GPs as a whole have been scandalised. So look, by all means do a follow-up study. I, for one, am sick about these generalised reports where whole professions or whole classes of people are accused of wrongdoing. It doesn't ring true to me. There's very sophisticated anti-fraud measures in place of the most tested and tried AI and software and the like. Look, let's go through it, but I think somebody's going to be apologising to GPs in the end.
Let's look at the flood situation. Another flood season, Simon Banks. It feels like we've barely moved on from and certainly haven't even moved on from the previous one. It's still mopping up, and the various recovery efforts, people being moved out of those flood zones in the northern rivers. On this occasion, we're talking about Shepparton, surrounding areas, Akucha, Tasmania, central west of New South Wales, a saturated system being hit with more rain.
Yeah, and Kieran, if the Bureau of Meteorology is correct, we're looking at another month before we even reach the peak of this current La Nina, which is the third in a row, which in itself is unusual. Look, the reality is that climate variability is becoming a bigger and bigger issue in Australia, and whether it's floods, fires, or the intensity of cyclones, these are having a bigger impact on Australians in their ordinary lives and a bigger impact on our economy. It's why, as a country, we have to take climate change ultimately seriously, because this is not going to get any better if we put our head in the sand and pretend that all of this stuff is going to go away. And even if we were to take, drastic action tomorrow, it wouldn't solve the problem tomorrow. This is a modern reality that we've got to learn to adapt to and live with, but it doesn't mean we have to do it in the longer run. As I said, action on climate change comes, yes, at some cost, but we see every time these events keep occurring that the cost of not acting, as we have known now for more than a decade, are far greater.
Peter McGauran, with the impact on farmers, the dairy industry, I've had people contact me this morning saying that tankers getting in to the dairy farms in Victoria, for example, being impacted by road closures. It all has a flow-on effect to not just the budget, but kitchen table budgets, because it's going to hit inflation in these areas.
Oh, definitely, Kieran. The primary producers are being hard hit. It's tragic. When the rice producers are suffering because they're waterlogged, that tells you something. Look, there is climate change. Every farmer, every person knows that. Whether you can attribute it to greenhouse gas emissions is another thing, or to what extent you can. I think Simon is bringing everything together, because then you have issues about turning off the coal-powered stations and trying to replicate baseload energy with renewable sources, which just pushes up the price of the cost of electricity to households. So don't forget, the government's meant to be reducing the cost of electricity, not pushing it up. So look, this is complex, it's interlinked to a certain extent, but I don't think you should be jumping from these terrible flood events to immediately greenhouse gas policy.
When you look at the impact on the power bills, we've been discussing that the last week with the warnings of an increase in power prices by 35%. It was one of the warnings, Simon Banks. Regardless of whether you think that that's the right way or not, the government is going to that 80% renewables by 2030. Can they do it without skyrocketing prices and without sort of looking back? We know that maybe the transition, according to many, has been squeezed, but this is the reality that they face now.
Yeah, and in fact, as Chris Bowen's quite rightly said, if anything, we need to go harder and faster on this transition if we're going to actually bring electricity prices down over the medium to longer term. I mean, the reality is the crisis we've got in our energy systems at the moment are largely driven by a combination of factors, for example, the war in Ukraine and other things, but they are crises that are occurring first and foremost, in fact, within the fossil fuel part of the energy market. The fact, for example, we're getting record outages in coal-fired power stations at the moment because basically we've got these old clangers that are basically hanging on for dear life, but are getting increasingly expensive to run and maintain. The fact that our gas prices have gone through the roof, obviously significantly because of the war in Ukraine. They're the things that are driving the short-term impact on our electricity prices. And if we'd been building out a renewables network faster over the last decade, we'd actually have more and cheaper options in the market already. The truth is that any of the experts you talk to in this area say that this is the direction we need to go in. This is where, for the medium and longer term, we will get the benefit. Unfortunately, in the short term, this is the price that we pay because we haven't managed that transition well today, particularly over the last decade.
Peter McGauran, this is going to be a problematic one for the government to try and navigate, but they're committed to doing it. So this is where they're going to head. And of course, Jim Chalmers, his first big test in an economic sense, comes a week from tomorrow with the budget, and this is obviously a big part of that with their rewiring the nation policy.
Understood, and I understand Simon's enunciation of the government and the Labor Party's policy, but you are never going to bring down energy prices so long as you rely on renewable sources. It will never bring down prices. Baseload coal will, baseload gas will, but not renewable energy. So over a period of time, the government will feel the full effect of a disgruntled constituency that is paying for higher energy prices. This is the sleeping dog for the government, and it's up to the Liberal Party and the opposition to start the hard work now, planning for it. I think it will be an inevitable political contest on this issue, but they've got to get in there now, win the argument, because I concede the government is winning the argument on renewable energy as the future.
Well, when you say it'll never be cheaper, what about when that storage question is answered? You're saying it'll never be cheaper or more sustainable. What's driving your thinking on that, Peter?
Batteries, so we're going to store it in batteries. Batteries themselves consume a great deal of energy to construct. I can't predict 30, 50 years down the track, but I can certainly predict the next 20 years, nothing's going to replace coal or gas in terms of economies of scale. So I think the opposition should be in there. People's horizons aren't beyond 20 or 30 years. You can win the argument about the Labor Party's higher energy prices over the next 20 years. Beyond that, I don't think there's a lot of political interest in the issue.
Peter McGauran, Simon Banks, gentlemen, thanks.
Pleasure.
Talk to you soon.